Hey there, everybody. I'm Mike DeLisio.
I'm Chris Yee.
And I'm Roy Kennedy.
And today we're going to be taking a look at a game that has been generating quite a bit of buzz. This is called Arcs, which is the newest game from Leder Games. They are well known for other games by this designer primarily, things like Root and Oath, and Vast was the first one, but that was with different designers. So in Arcs, this is a space-themed game where you are using I'm going to call it a trick-taking adjacent mechanism to drive your actions. And so Chris has done the overview for this. So Chris, why don't you show us how it's played, and we'll come back here and we'll let you know what we think.
Here's an example of what Arcs looks like set up on the table. I'm going to be trying to give a brief overview, not a full rules teach. This is an individual player area down here, so for the yellow player and for the blue player. The central board out here. This is the space map where players are going to be moving around, building up starports, building up cities, collecting these resources to spend for bonuses or to try to score these different conditions here. Every game based on a setup card that shows where players are set up. It'll also show an out-of-play arc of space. And so 3 and 5 are just considered to be adjacent to each other for this particular game, and that will change based on the random setup card that you play with. Now, there are also going to be individual player cards here, which are dealt out randomly, 1 through 7 in a 4-player game, 2 through 6 in lower player count games, which will drive the action here. There are also going to be the ambitions area over here on the side. This is where you're going to determine during the course of play which of the 5 conditions are going to be worth which amount of points during the round. Over on the left side over here, we have the guild cards, which are bonus cards that you can get, which will make you more distinct from other players, and also give you icons that might score for endgame scoring conditions, or end of chapter scoring conditions. The game is played either over 5 chapters, or until players hit a certain victory point threshold based on 4, 3, or 2 players. Now, players have dealt out these cards, and then there's going to be a little bit of an action lead and follow type of a sequence here, which I'll give you an overview of an idea of. Let's say that I, as the lead player, want to play out this card here. It is a construction-suited card. There's a construction, aggression, administration, and mobilization. But those aren't the type of actions. Underneath the title of each of the cards shows what type of actions you can take. So with construction, you can do a build action or a repair action. This is just the type of card being played. You'll notice that administration cards also have repair action shown, but they also have tax and influence. Mobilization allows you to spend action points on movement or influence, and then aggression allows you to do battle, move, or secure. Now, there's a lot of terms. I will explain each of those here in more detail, but let me explain the flow of the card system. If I, as the lead player, choose to play out this card, the 2 number is not relevant yet, but it will be in a second. The number of pips or stars underneath it shows how many actions I may take, and with a construction card, I can build or repair for each of these actions. So I can do 4 action points, and I've led with this suit of card. The next player can choose to do one of 3 things. They can surpass, copy, or pivot. Surpass means to play a higher numbered card than the lead numbered card. So if the third player were to play this 3, that's still surpassing the lead card, even if it doesn't surpass the 6 here. If you surpass, you get to take action points on the card equal to the number of pips shown on that card. 2 pips on a 6, 3 pips on a 3, for example, and they can do build or repair actions. Now, if a player chooses not to or cannot, they can do one of these other 2 things here, which is to copy or to pivot. Copy means to play a card face down, and will copy one of the 2 actions here that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. And pivot means to play one of these cards out and to do an action that is printed on that card instead. So with an aggression card, they can battle, move, or secure instead of doing this. Now, the highest numbered card, once all of the players have played out cards, of the highest numbered card of the lead suit will secure initiative for the next round, meaning that that player will go first. All the cards are discarded face down, and now this player is going to be able to lead out with any of the action cards, and then the other players will surpass, copy, or pivot, and you continue doing this until all players are out of cards. Now there's a few other things here. Now this player is going to do this one, do 3 administration actions. The next player decides, you know what, I could play this 5 and I might get the initiative, but I want to do this, and I would also like to secure a card, or secure initiative by discarding an extra card. Any player can do this, and the first player to do so will secure the initiative, so they get to guaranteed be the leader, because someone else might have been able to play a higher number card and do that. The number 7 cards also have that effect. If a number 7 of the lead suit is played, bam, they get to seize the initiative. Now let's talk about one last very important thing. When you play a card, there are 2 things that you can choose to do before you carry out the actions. The first is, if you're the lead player, you may choose to declare an ambition. What that means is on the bottom of the card is going to be one of these symbols that matches one of the 5 ambitions out here. So if I chose to, I could declare an ambition and 0 out the number of my card, which means that it'll be easier for other players to follow that suit and get all of their action points. I 0 this out, and then I get to declare that, in this case, the captive, or the tyrant, ambition is going to score this round. Because if I have a lot of captives here, I think that I'm in the lead here. I would like to score them. So, and I would like to make them worth the most points. So I've declared an ambition. The other thing you can do before you take actions is that you can spend these resource tokens that you've been collecting over the course of the game to get bonus actions and to get little important bonuses that make you have a little more control down here. However, spending these resources also means that you are potentially not going to score them if the matching type of ambition has been declared in the round. Now that we've done that, let's go into the actions themselves. Every player has a useful play right here which breaks down everything that I've just taught about the card play sequence. As you unfold it, it also shows you what the different actions are, which I'll now cover, as well as the end of chapter scoring. So, let's talk about the actions. First is the build action. So when you play cards that allow you to build or repair, you can spend action points on either or any of the actions shown on it. So let's talk about building. Building allows you to place out new cities or starports into regions where you have available space on the map. Cities are going to give you these resource tokens later in the game when you tax, and then starports allow you to fly around the map quicker and also allow you to build ships in the regions where you have starports, but not cities. So that's the build action there. Next up is repair. Over the course of the game, your ships might get damaged, indicated by laying them on their side, and when that happens, you can repair them by writing them up. If a ship gets destroyed, it gets hit twice, it is destroyed and goes over to become a trophy for the player that destroyed them. Repairing can also be done for cities and for starports to write them up. They also have 2 hits of damage before they're destroyed. Next up is the tax action. As I mentioned, places where you have a city, for each tax action point that you have, you can take one of the matching resources of those types here and place them into your cargo hold. Next up, you can choose to influence. Influencing allows you to take one action point to place one of these of your people out onto these guild cards. When you do the secure action, you then get to secure, or you get to take one of these cards where you have the majority of people on it. If you take one of these, your people go back to your supply and you have a new card with some special effect on it. If you are able to secure a card where you have a majority and there are other players who have fewer than you, then you get to take those other players' markers as captives, which will score for the tyrant over here. Next action is going to be movement. You can take a fleet of any size and you can move it 1 space, either into an adjacent space here or into a central arc. Each one of these is going to be 1 space of movement, remembering that this kind of counts as not there. Now, if you do a movement from a starport, you can also choose to move in an uninterrupted, continuous movement until you choose to reach a place where you want to stop or until you run into other players' ships. So starports allow for zippier movement. And lastly, let's talk about battle. The battle action has a few steps here, but basically for each of the ships that you have in the fight, you can choose what number of dice you'd like to roll. Now the blue dice are very simple. They have a hit and a miss, 3 of each, and so they're 50-50. The red dice here have more aggressive sides with more successes. However, they also can allow you to get hit yourself from combat. So if I'm the player here, yellow, choosing to roll 3 dice of combat, this symbol means I take 1 damage to one of my ships, and then I deal out 5 damage. I choose how I want to divvy out damage, and in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4 is enough to summarily destroy all of the ships in that region. If there are more ship health than damage you get to deal out, then you get to choose how you want to damage them out, focusing on destroying them or focusing on damaging more of them and tipping them over. Now, the last type of die out here is relevant when you are attacking a space that has cities or starports. These are raiding dice. So you may choose whatever combination of dice that you would like to roll in addition to these raiding dice. Now, this is bad because I'm getting a lot of damage done back to me because I chose riskier dice, but I also rolled several of these key symbols, and these keys allow you to steal resources from players' cargo hold area if you have rolled that number of keys, or to even steal guild cards from those players if you do. The last thing is that there are damage on the orange die that will damage buildings, and whether you want to or not, if you have destroyed a city here, let's say this was a city, you're going to do something called provoke outrage. When you destroy a city on a type of planet, those people no longer want to work with you. So you take one of your people here and you cover up that matching symbol, and you can no longer collect any guild cards that have that type of symbol. If you have any, you would lose them, and you can no longer collect that type of resource for the rest of the game. If you had any, you would also lose those. War crimes are bad, kids. So those are the different actions that you can take over the course of the game. Once all players have spent all of their cards, you're going to look at which of the conditions were chosen to be scored, and then you'll go through and do those. So Tyrant, whoever has the most captives, is going to score 5 points. Second place is going to score 3. Then you go through Keeper, whoever has the most of these relic symbols, whether on the tokens or whether if there are any on cards that match that type. And then lastly here, Tycoon for material and oil. Once these are scored, the lowest number one of these is going to flip over and become worth more points for the next chapter. And you continue doing this until all 5 chapters have been played or a player hits the end game victory point threshold.
Okay, well, you probably can infer from that overview that this is not a game where we're going to be giving you a how to play. There's a lot going on in the game, but that's really, honestly, I think that's the first thing I want to start on. We'll get into the components and all those other things, but I knew coming into this game that I had a little bit that I was coming to it with. I don't want to say baggage because that sounds a little too dramatic, but I had played other games, other leader games by the designer Cole, and so I was curious how I was getting ready to say Oath, how ARX fit into this kind of oeuvre of games where I've rated Root and Oath very highly. But they're also games that I very rarely can get to the table. And I kind of wondered where Oath was going to, I keep saying Oath, where ARX was going to fit into that. And so just so I get a baseline, I think both of you have played Root. Have either or both of you played Oath before?
With you, yes.
I thought so, yeah.
But yeah, I definitely think this is more accessible overall. Like, I think as far as like Cole's games go, they're known for being extremely asymmetrical, like lots of thinky decisions going on. And this still has those thinky decisions, but I mean, there is asymmetry when you add in the different alien powers, but it's not drastically abstract like his normal games are, because that causes those games to be a little bit harder to teach. I think this is a lot easier to teach. I actually taught both you guys how to play this game, and I love Space Conquest games, so that was a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, I agree. It's less overwhelming up front, despite the overview that I did, right. Trying to kind of give those ideas. There are some strange elements or some tricky things, which I think is signature to Cole's design mindset.
Right, yeah.
But if you come from a little bit more of a trick-taking background, if you come from a little bit more of a card-driven war game background as well, which I know that Cole comes from, I think that the elements fall into place a little bit easier, far easier than Oath, and there's less unique explanation per each player than in Root. These other games that Leader is known for and regaled for, and I think that makes this one more approachable, easier to teach, one I look forward more to teaching personally.
I'm a huge fan of like space and conquest genre overall. So like this is my style of game, like the kind of game I really like. A lot of space conquest games are in like my top 100, and I just think this is interesting because it does different things, than those games. It's not approaching it the same way. The whole trick taking aspect of it makes it very different as far as like you kind of have to play off of what you have in your hand. That's kind of determined. I wonder how you guys, because you guys love trick taking games. I am not much of a fan of that like style of game as much. So it's kind of interesting to see like what you guys' thoughts on that are as opposed to what mine will be.
I can go ahead and start off on that. Yeah, it's a neat hook, right? Like I said, I think it's trick-taking adjacent, but I like having that framework to build off of. But when I've taught the game, I did ask the players, are you familiar with trick-taking at all? Only because it's a little bit of shorthand. If you're not familiar with trick-taking games, you can still play this game fine. But I would probably have to go into a little bit more detail than I would normally if you did know trick taking. So the idea is that one player is going to be the lead player in every round, and it's the player who has the initiative, right? And that is one of the jockeying points in this game, is seizing initiative from another player so that you can be the lead player in the next round, and you have the opportunity, if you're the lead player, to determine one of the end round scoring, or end chapter, I should say, scoring conditions. And so I do like that as an action selection method. It's clever. It's interesting. I also think it's really brilliant that if you are setting that initiative, if you're setting the scoring condition, that your card becomes a 0 value. Because one of the ways that there is trick-taking, but not really, is that if you play a card that surpasses, but is still the same same suit as the lead card, higher number, then you get to do all of the action pips on that card. So that is something that I think makes it easier if you understand the idea of trick-taking. And then you can pivot, which is playing off-suit. So again, really all it's doing is it's giving you a little bit of shorthand to an action selection system. So I like that action selection system. It feels novel to me, but you don't have to know trick-taking to know how to play this game.
For me, it's like double-sided because like I like the option of like being able to be like thinking through those different cards and be like, okay, which one do I play? How do I pass? And this the fact that like, oh, well, I really want to lead next time, so I can be the one choosing the scoring objective. So I'm going to like discard an extra card to do that so I can take this thing, and I know for a fact I'm going to be able to lead on this. And then the action of like, do I play a higher card or do I play a lower card? The order that you play your cards matters. The thing that really wrecks it for me sometimes is like when you get a hand of all the same type of action and like you're super limited. I know that's a common thing sort of like in trick taking. Sometimes your hand is just like, well, I'm not going to be doing what I want to do this round. And that's okay in a quick breezy trick taking game. But in this game, it like sets it back for me a little bit just because it's like, man, that stinks of like, man, I have to hope somebody else plays an action that I like and then I can fake this card as that action. But this is just a game that you really, really, to do well in, you have to realize you're going to have to play with the cards you're dealt. You know, you're going to have to ebb and flow with what you have in your hand and try to like pivot as the game goes along. And I normally enjoy that in games. I do like that here, but this is very much like your hands are decently tied to what your action cards are giving you. So you have to be very careful on like, you know, figuring out how to do that. And there's a ton of different manipulation on that with the different goods and being able to spin those to do different things. But yeah, it's definitely a very like, it feels like a Cole Wehrle game. Like you want to do a ton of things, but it's like you can only do this specific thing and you need to do it at the right time, you know? I mean, which gives you that angst, right?
For me, it has the right amount of restriction, but also bonuses to make things work in your way. I love spending those resource tokens. I have a relic. I'm going to secure a card. I'm going to take one of those guild cards. But at the same time, someone just set the ambition to score for having those relics. And now I'm going, ugh, I want to do both. I want to have and I want to spend. And I also want to use these cards in a way that really makes sense to my advantage. And for me, what it does is it keeps me engaged the whole time. I think that's the strength of it, is that, yes, I'm dealt a hand of cards I was not hoping for, and now it's making me fight to be clever, to use my resource, use my guild cards, use those hand of cards to play what I want to, or is it more clever and more advantageous for me to pivot towards what this hand has? When do I seize the initiative? By ditching a whole extra card so that I can declare which scoring objective I'm going to be working for. It gives you a lot, despite the fact that it also puts you in that restriction of your hand of cards.
Yeah, it is also kind of interesting, like when one player, like when I was playing, like I got ahead pretty early in the game, and it felt like for the rest of the game, it was one versus many. And I was doing that, like I was getting specific cards and being like, okay, my strategy is this, I need to just pivot and go this direction. But it made me feel a little bit bad for the other players who were like getting hands of card being like, I really need to slow Roy down or steal some of his stuff in some ways, but I really don't have any cards that can affect that whatsoever. So you just have to know going into this game that like your hands are going to be tied sometimes based on what you're dealt, and you really just have to figure out how to do what's best for you based off of that.
And I think that you both have talked about it without like coming out and saying it. The prelude actions, I think, are the biggest kind of mitigation to having a hand that you don't necessarily have a lot of variety in. And so the prelude actions is what they're talking about when they say that you can spend resources to do particular actions. And I think those are super important. I think they probably need to be emphasized to new players how important they are, because they feel like they're adjacent to what you're doing, but they're really, to me, they're as important as the main action. Is being able to have those available to you. And that's why causing outrage in a city is so impactful, because one of the things you're doing is you're taxing cities and you're attacking cities, but if you get too aggressive and you destroy a city, then you don't have access to whatever basically that planet type was as an outrage action. And that can be very, very damaging to you, very impactful. It also allows you to take one of the court cards. So this is a game that, like many of Cole's games, like probably all of Cole's games that I've played at least, has a lot of interacting parts that are kind of like everything affects everything else in some way. But the one thing that I feel like that Arcs is unique from the other games of Cole's that I've found is that I feel like it's less likely to lead to king-making situations. I've found that in other of Cole's games, king-making is almost baked into the design. I don't really feel like it is here. You can still have it in Arcs for sure, but it doesn't feel like it's a core design element as much as it did in Root or especially in Oath, which is kind of nice, actually. I mean, I kind of like having a little bit more structure. The game feels a little more structured to me than certainly Oath, maybe even more than Root. And so that's something that I felt was a little bit different.
One of the things that was interesting to me too, though, was like the fact that you can get so many points. Like one player can get so many points in one turn. If you're able to like line stuff up, if your hand and the stars align properly, you can get a massive amount of points. If you're able to like stack all of I love the mechanic of like choosing what thing scores. That's amazing. But if somebody's able to stack all of them on the same thing and they win that and they have a ton of their buildings built, they can get massive points in one turn. So it almost comes to where it's like, oh man, I need that king making back in. So that way it's like, so pull them down a little bit. Or the other players are just going to have to figure out a way to like make sure that does not happen again, But yeah, I love that.
I agree. And I think for me, one of the things that is, it's a joy in this game choosing the dice when you're gonna fight. Yeah. Like the card play, I think is brilliant and I love it. And it might be a little bit more divisive, but I think that people are generally going to enjoy. Okay, do I pick safer dice? Do I pick raiding dice? Am I going to try to steal from people? And when you blow up a city and you outrage an entire faction in this game, and you no longer get to work with them ever, you know that you kind of did that to yourself. So it puts a lot of agency in the attacker, the way that you do damage. For being a very involved game, it does several things that I enjoy streamlining. For example, all the decisions are in the attackers. There's no defense dice. There's no defender chooses how to do damage. Everything's in the hands of the attacker, win or lose, from that combat. You blew up a lot of your own ships on the aggression. You shouldn't have picked the riskier dice. You shouldn't have blown up that city and lost all of your resources right before the hoarding resources ambition scores. And so I just love that. It's such a great chef's kiss kind of thing.
I love those pressure luck dice. Like, those are amazing. Like, being able to, it's like, okay, I get a bunch of dice, but how am I going to choose it? You could be like, I'm going to take just all the safe dice. I'm going to just do damage. I know I'm not going to hurt myself, but I'm not going to do as much. But yeah, and then the fact of, like, I love the fact also that you can steal things from the other players if you do, like, start attacking cities and things like that. But there's a risk to that also. It's like, cool, you have that really cool advisor character or leader character. I'm going to try to steal it. You have those resources. And if I get ahead of you in one of those resources, I'm going to win that scoring thing. I'm going for that, It's just an interesting dynamic. I love the fact that you can do that. And that is, like, the opposite of that. Like, that does feel very kingmakery of, like, oh, we can gang up. But sometimes it's really hard to get the aggression cards to be able to actually do that,
Yeah, and the one thing that the one way that this game reminds me of PAX Premier 2nd Edition, which is another Cole game, is that you can't ever get too fond of what you've got in front of you because it can get taken, right? The cost of to take your stuff is all right there. It's like, man, I love this card. I'm looking at it. It has 2 keys on it. That's not too hard to take from me. So you have to get used to that idea that what you have can get taken from you. It's not quite as fluid as it is in PAX Premier 2nd Edition, but it definitely is an element here. And honestly, I think that's very necessary because the resources are very, very tight in this game. They're supremely tight. And so if they weren't easy to take from other players, easy is not the right word. If they weren't possible to be taken from other players, then it would feel too tight. And I think I do want to put it out there. I think for some players, this will feel too tight. I've played with players that felt like the resources were too tight in the game and that they weren't fluid enough. But that is where the rating dice come in and allows that to kind of open up because, there are even cards in the game that basically you become the market for all of those things. So all the materials come to you or what have you. And they still get taken from you and such, but it kind of leads into this feeling of monopoly, of holding on to resources. So you kind of have to be aware of that going in. If you don't like games that can feel tight, this may cause you a little bit of anxiety in that aspect.
I think some of the characters, like those, like you're saying, that can just give you all this stuff, they're so crazy. It feels like it's overpowered. This is one of those games where it's like, that's overpowered. Now that's overpowered. No, that's overpowered. And I don't know, that stuff makes things exciting in games where it's like, I got the character. And the fact that you're going back and forth, like trying to outbid each other on those ridiculous characters, especially once people know the game more, they're like, he's out, I'm going all in. And you're trying to figure out how to get your advisors on there to influence it enough and score it before somebody else. And if somebody else is racing you, you get to capture all of theirs. And that can be another scoring condition. There's so many intertwined pieces in this that I think are really cool.
Do you feel like it's a good point to move on to final thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, that was my thought, and we haven't really talked about components. So if you have any notes you want to put in about the components, go ahead and put those into your final thoughts. Are you good to go first, Chris, or do you have a different?
Sure. If it hasn't been obvious, I really love this game. It's not just a game that I respect the design. It's one that I love playing. The card play, it reminds me of card-driven war games. If you've played something like Twilight Struggle, where you draw your hand of cards and you go, not what I wanted this round. I know certain things are going to score, and how do I make this work? It has that same feeling, but I love trick-taking games, and so mixing those two elements together is so rewarding. All the stuff about combat that we've talked about, all the way that it's so player-driven, and the fact that these guild cards are just bananas. The first time you see some of them, you're like, no way that works and flows in this game, and it never completely loses itself. I love so much about that. I think the artwork is phenomenal. Almost every leader game, we're going to say that. Kyle Farron's artwork is gorgeous. And I was worried a little bit in a space setting, how is it going to look? Is it going to look too bland? Once you get the ships out there, that very black board becomes quite vibrant. So there's potential upgrades you can buy, miniatures for the ships. I prefer the wooden pieces, honestly, because of the function of laying them down to show damage. It works easier, I think, with the wooden meeples than the miniatures. So I think just as this game comes, base game, not talking about the expansion, which I know people are saying is also great. I'm very interested in playing that. I love this. I forgot to say my score. My score is a 9.
Wow.
I really like how this package comes together. I think that it's tight enough. It has those moments where you're going to have to sort of king make moments, but that doesn't feel like the whole game is king made on a knife's edge. It's every chapter scores, and every chapter really matters with those points. I think this game does so many things right, and it makes it so fun to play and a little bit easier to get to the table than some of Cole's other designs. It's a 9 for me.
Gotcha. Well, for me, I know this is going to seem like a drastic downshift. I still really enjoy the game, and I think it's awesome. I'm giving it a 7.5. I think it's fun. I love Space Conquest games. I think I'll play this game. It's a lot of fun. For me, my hangups are I'm not as big a fan of the trick-taking stuff. I don't like being dealt a hand and being 100% stuck with that. And I feel like this game does tie your hand in a lot of ways. And then even when you're trying, I wish it actually did, like you said, a lot of his other games have more of that, like jump on the leader sort of thing. I wish it had a little bit more flexibility allowing you to do that. I understand with like advanced players are going to be able to figure out how to mitigate all of that stuff and use all the different stuff. But it kind of stinks sometimes you get dealt an alien race that is really good at combat and you never get dealt any cards that help you with the combat. And you're like, please, somebody play something combat so I can use my alien power. That would be great. That would be awesome. And I mean, sometimes you're just kind of like playing the game with the hand you're dealt. And I'm actually really good at that. Like I crushed the players I was playing with, and that part was fun, but I felt kind of bad for the other players that were having a little bit of a rougher time getting their stuff going. I mean, I like won the game. There was a guy that had like a couple points at the end or like no points, and you can have games that are like that because if you win those objectives so, like over and over and over again, like you're not leaving them for the other players at all. But I love the scoring in this. I love what's going on here, and I think it sets itself apart in the genre of Space Conquest style games. So I think it deserves a place on people's shelves, so 7.5 for me.
Yeah, and just as a clarification point, when you're talking about those alien powers, those are technically not in the base game, even though they're included in it, but just so people don't get confused. That's something you can do, the leaders and the lore you can add to it. But yeah. So this one is, I obviously like it a lot also. I mean, based on kind of some of the things I've said and also the background that I've liked a lot of Cole's games in the past, and I do like trick-taking. I've rated some of Cole's other games a 9. Right, Root and I think Oath also I rated a 9, and so this is going to be a 9.5 because I think this is my favorite of Cole's designs, and as much appreciation, it's interesting. Chris, you said appreciate the designs. That's kind of where I've always been. I've been in awe almost of these designs, but I've also been reticent to try to teach them to other players, because I'm afraid that they're not going to have the greatest experience because I'm going to miss something, I'm going to forget something, and it's going to really impact their experience. I don't quite feel that same trepidation in teaching ARCs. I may still miss a little something, but they're still going to get the core elements of the game, which to me are so much easier for me to compartmentalize. It's like, okay, I understand this action selection system. I understand the core of it. I understand the basic idea of what you're doing on the board. I understand the idea of what these agent cards are going to do. I feel like I've got a better grasp on the entire system than I did in the other games, where in the other games, I enjoyed playing them, especially when it was being taught to me, and I enjoyed playing them when other players of the same skill level were playing with me, but I was always, like I said, a little trepidatious heading into those games, where I don't feel that with this. The other thing that I really appreciate is that it gives you this kind of epic experience, and I know that word gets thrown around a lot, especially in space games, but it gives you that type of an experience with such an economy of components, right? The base game is a small box. I mean, I wouldn't call it a small box. I call it a medium box, right? About the same size as Root. And not a lot of cards, not a lot of cardboard chits, not a lot of pieces, right? You've got your kind of core pieces, but there's not a lot. It doesn't take up a huge amount of table space, right? And I appreciate that you can do this on a regular table with 4 players and feel like you're having a pretty epic experience, a space opera, whatever you want to call it, which, to be honest, is not really my bag. I like it. I don't love it, right? But what I do love is variable scoring that is player driven. I've always loved that. I do love a feeling of interaction that is not forced, but part kind of baked into the design. What I do love is the action selection system that I've mentioned. So all of these things, and the fact that I do feel like I can teach this to people, and that I'm not going to necessarily forget and have to relearn it every time that I teach it, just takes it up to that next level of a 9.5. I feel like it's outstanding. I think it's my favorite, like I said, of Cole's designs. I haven't played all of his. All of his that I've played, I've been just awestruck by the thinking process that went into it, the thoughtfulness that clearly went into the design. But this is one that I feel like is the most approachable, even more so than Root. And so that's what knocks it up to a 9.5 for me. All right, well, there you go. That is Arcs. I think all of us recommend it. 2 of us are giving it that seal of excellence. So that's gonna be the
I love the fact that I'm like, this is my style of game, and I'm slightly lower. I still definitely love the game, so don't judge me on that. But then you guys are like, not normally my style of game, and you rate it even higher. But it just shows like the depth of like strategy and different opinions on this. So I think this will hit a lot of people's table.
I agree absolutely.
Yeah, definitely got a lot of buzz. So if it sounds interesting, up your alley, definitely check out Arcs from Leader Games. All right, well, that's going to do it. This is Mike Delisio.
And this is Chris Yee.
And I'm Roy Kennedy.
And we are all going to traverse into the vast wonderland that is space.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching another video from the Dice Tower. Hey, you want to learn more about us, communicate with us? We have a Facebook group, we have a Discord channel, lots of different ways to get involved with the Dice Tower. And you can find that in our Linktree link below. So just click that, it will take you and you can communicate with us on Facebook, join our Facebook groups. There's lots of cool things that you can find and become part of the Dice Tower. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Tom Vasel.